live. You guys are live.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are doing a webinar on doing business in the United States, investment options for immigrants. My name is Ruby Powers. I'm a board certified immigration and nationality attorney, but I'm very excited to have my guest today, Saeed Tawali, who is a business and real estate transactions attorney here also in the Houston area. And we put together a presentation that merges some of the key areas where an immigrant can invest in business opportunities here in the United States, but then also bringing more from the corporate business structure, entity, and considerations, including timeline, which is very important in considerations when people are trying to immigrate to the United States. Lots of things have been held a little bit slower than normal because of COVID, but there's also a lot of business opportunity that's as we ease ourselves out of COVID as well. And so we felt that this was a really good time for us to have this conversation and let people know. And of course, this, like I always say, this doesn't replace a consultation with either one of us, but this is a great opportunity for you to sort of see the lay of the land of some key concepts. And you're always welcome to have a consultation with either one of us or at our firms to go into more detail. So just a little bit about me. I guess we'll just introduce ourselves. I've been practicing for 13 years. Started the firm in November 2009, board certified immigration. I also wrote a book about law practice management, which really is about business ownership. And so I love marrying the two between immigration, law practice management, business acumen. And so I bring that passion as well to my clients as they're finding ways to immigrate here to the United States. And Saeed, why don't you introduce yourself? I'm really excited to have you on here today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ruby, for having me. It's always great to collaborate with you, and it was awesome to see your amazing team behind the scenes and how you guys put this on. So really appreciate you including me. Just a little bit about myself. I was licensed 2007. I've had a Texas real estate transaction or a salesperson license since 2005, and I was licensed as a broker in 2007. I've been self-employed since I was 18 years old and have been doing that ever since. So very much like you, I'm an attorney, but also an entrepreneur. My clients are domestic and international business owners and real estate investors. And my practice is effectively a contracts practice, a transactions practice, focusing on the strategic uses of business entities and then the acquisition or purchase of businesses and real estate. So really excited to talk about the interplay of my area and how that fits into the kind of grand immigration process.
Thank you. So, who better to talk about this? We both have been entrepreneurs in spirit or in real life for a long time. And we bring that passion to those we represent. So in terms of the immigration side, I just wanted to tell a sort of really high level, what are the areas in which you can invest and get some immigration benefit of some sort, whether it's a short term or maybe it's a pathway to a green card. And so we're going to talk about the entrepreneurial investor parole, E2, L1A, new office, and the EB5 briefly. And then I'll let Saeed take it away. So this was super exciting news that we had recently that Biden revived the international entrepreneurial rule that was announced first under the Obama administration and then put on hold under the Trump administration. But this gives the opportunity for those who are more of a startup mentality concept, who can show proof that they can get certain amount of funding to get ability to be here in the United States for a few years at a time with the ability to extend it even further. And this just was announced I believe it was on May 10th, and we're recording this on what's today, May 28th. So this is new only, and that's the way it rolls with immigration, it seems like. So we're still taking in all of the details as they roll them out. But if you are interested in a startup and you have a business idea that you can get funding for, then this is something that you could consider to be here in the United States. This is a really great program also because for people um, uh, who wouldn't qualify for the E2, which I'm going to go over pretty soon, who are not part of one of the list of the treaty trader countries, then this gives them an opportunity. This also helps those who have a great idea and who might not have the traditional settings of a business, which most of USCS thinks it's an office space with a business plan that projects 5+ years and a whole bunch of employees. But what we realize is under COVID and with digitalization of life, that you really don't need the traditional office space and staff, etc., to be successful in a business. And so gives us a more of an opportunity in that more of that startup, more of a up to date type of mentality of how a business could also be successful. And I also like this because it helps attract new ideas into the United States. This also it's a, what would you call it? It's like a proof that we are open for business for foreign investors, and we are wanting to introduce them back again after the last 4 years of more or less not being as open to foreign investment under the Trump administration. Now we are, and this is what is signaling that to investors and to business owners, foreign investors. So the other thing is that USCIS has been modernizing the EB-5 Immigrant Visa Investor Program, which isn't as new, but it's about a year or so old. But they did increase the minimum investment instead from 1 million to 1.8 million, and made some other changes, which I'll go into. The E2 is another place where people can invest. Now, if you are a member, a citizen of and have their nationality of one of the many countries that the US has a treaty with, for example, Mexico and Pakistan, most of Europe, there's many countries that are on the treaty trader list, but some countries that are more notable are not, India and Venezuela. And so those nationalities have to find other ways to invest in the United States. But if you were to have as small as about 40,000 or so investment in a business, and it's all proportional to the size of the business that you're having, whether it could be a dog grooming business to a daycare to a franchise to a grocery store. It really could be almost anything. And there's not a certain requirement of employees that you have to have. But this is a non-immigrant visa. It allows your spouse and children to work, to live in the United States, and a spouse to work in the United States during the validity, but it doesn't give you, it is not a direct pathway to a legal permanent residency. And it is, in many cases, short term, but some people have had it even up to 10 years or so. But you do have to still have intent to return back to your home country. This is a great opportunity to get here in the United States, invest, to see the lay of the land, maybe upgrade to an EB-5, or maybe the spouses can be sponsored by an employer. So this really gives an opportunity for people to get here in the United States, grow business, and see what other opportunities there are. And then in terms of, you have E2 in general, you have to be the national of one of those countries that have the treaty, and it has to be a substantial amount of capital. It cannot be marginal. You must also prove where the funds come from. If they can be gifted, but you need to prove that everything was legitimate and legal means in which the person who gave you the gift received those funds as well. This can be a little cumbersome when some national countries are not as paper trail heavy on funds, but this can also be overcome. And the other one that I like to see, I encourage people as well, is if you have a business in a foreign country and it's doing really well and successful, but you want to open a new office here in the United States, then we look to the new office L1A, the new office. And you must have worked in the foreign company for 1 year in the last 3 years. And then if you can show the business plan and the reasons for why you'd want to expand here in the country, you could do the new office L. This is great because a spouse can work, children can be in the United States, and it can give you a pathway to a green card if you can show enough employees and your executive role in the future. So this is a great way. And this is also a possibility for those who are not a treaty citizens of certain countries under like the E2, for example. This also has dual intent. So there's lots of great things about the L. Might be a little bit more cumbersome to qualify, but once you do, it gives you a lot more options. And then again, we have the EB5, which at the minimum to invest in, it would be at 900,000. And then at the most, if you were to devise your own business, would be 1.8 million. And the key point is that you would create and preserve 10 permanent full-time jobs within a couple of years. First, you do the petition that you've shown this investment and that you're creating these jobs, and then you would remove the conditions 2 years later that these qualifications were met. And so this is another opportunity it's more quickly to a green card opportunity for the spouse and unmarried children under 21. But this also does require a more significant investment and of funds and to prove that you do create the jobs required, which is a little bit different than the other ones I mentioned that don't necessarily have a certain set number of the investment required, nor do they have a certain number of people that you must employ. So, that was a really quick overview of the places where somebody, foreign investor can come here and invest in businesses. And so, Saida, when you go ahead, feel free to show us more in terms of sort of corporate structure, considerations, timelines, and such that a business owner or investor would need to consider when they're looking to do business here in the United States.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Can you see my screen? Can everyone see my
Yeah,
screen here?
yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Ruby, thanks for that amazing intro. I'm not an immigration lawyer, if that's not clear. I do work with immigration attorneys, and the way that we work in that regard is that, a lot of times the immigration is kind of guiding the considerations, right? It's the first priority. How do we get over here to the US? How do we get ourselves and our business set up properly? And so a lot of times we're leaning on Ruby or someone like Ruby to give us the guidance about what is the framework that we're operating under, and then we'll kind of carve that entity to fit that. But then beyond that, we really look at the individual that we're dealing with. Usually the owners are who we're working with, and we will help them kind of go beyond just that initial structuring and look at their lives and real estate holdings and kind of estate planning. So as a general overview, just to see the context of where this fits in, we are a husband and wife owned super small law firm, 2 lawyers and an assistant basically most of the time. We work with domestic and international individuals, families, real estate investors, and the owners of privately held companies in basically 3 areas: trust and estates, business, and real estate transactions. And so this presentation is going to focus on the incorporation aspect of the business startup piece of our practice. And so this is a general outline. We kind of break it into 2 primary areas. You've got the choice of entity considerations, which we consider the planning phase, and we do a ton of planning. Often what clients don't know is that planning sometimes can take longer than execution, just to kind of get the right setup agreed to is often the hardest part. So we'll talk about that here in a second. And then we get into the actual formation process, which is the execution of the plan. And then I have a couple of pitfalls that are specifically related to these immigration related business setups that I'll talk about. So on choice of entity, this is a pretty broad topic. I'm really going to just talk about it pretty briefly on a high level. But the first thing that we're really looking at is, where are we incorporating? Which state is our business going to be in? And so I have here three common possibilities. You've got Delaware, Wyoming, and Texas. These states have different appeals, but Delaware is a state that has really well-developed corporate laws and great courts. And Delaware is a fantastic state if you're looking to raise very large amounts of money from institutional investors, because that's where those investors feel comfortable with the law. Delaware is also good for anonymity. Wyoming is one of these little more progressive states where it's a little bit riskier to incorporate, but if you really care about anonymity, you care about asset protection, Wyoming and Nevada, for example, are really good states. But call us biased, I really love Texas, and I feel like Texas is one of the best states to be in. Texas has great advanced business laws, great asset protection from its entities, and no state income tax, which really you can't beat. So we really do prefer Texas, but we help our clients make that decision. And then usually the second factor, other than the immigration, the second factor that's really guiding these discussions is the tax side of things. So one thing that Ruby touched on is whether the country that the client is living in or is a citizen of already has a treaty with the United States. That is largely going to guide the taxation of their business entity or of themselves. And so this is going to kind of govern whether or not we're talking about direct ownership, or the actual individual owners who are looking to come to the US are owning the business entity here in the US themselves, or whether this is going to be some corporate ownership structure or a subsidiary of a foreign company that already exists in some other country. And so then that kind of will lead you into the next aspect of that, which is, are we looking at some corporation where you have an entity level tax where the company itself files a tax return and owes taxes? Or are we looking for pass-through taxation where the owners themselves have all the profits and losses of the company passed through the company and onto their personal income tax return? There are various approaches to this, but one big factor for non-treaty countries is that if you have individual ownership, there's going to be a 30% withholding requirement of the profits of that company right off the top. So sometimes this tax withholding requirement can become so burdensome that people will opt to avoid it altogether and set up a corporate style entity to avoid that type of withholding. Another consideration that I touched on briefly is whether the state that we're looking to incorporate in is subject to income taxation. What does that taxation look like? And then one aspect that we can uniquely touch upon as a firm that does also estate planning. And I do have a pitfall section. I'm not going to talk about this there, but this is often a surprise for a lot of people who are looking to the US as a place to start a new life or to set up a business or expand their business, is the estate tax here in the US. And I'll just briefly go into that. So the estate tax is sometimes known as a death tax. The estate tax is a tax that a person or an estate pays on the assets that a person leaves behind after they pass away. Okay, so if you are a US citizen or a non-citizen resident, the exemption amount, the amount that you can leave to your heirs without having to pay a tax, is really high. It's $11.7 million per individual, or $23.4 million for a married couple. So this is a pretty high exemption amount, and statistically, not a lot of people are going to fall into a category that has assets over that amount. So most people who pass away are going to be able to leave their estate completely tax-free, estate tax-free anyway, to their heirs. If you have an estate over that threshold, any amounts over that limit are going to be taxed at 40% at death. So it is a pretty high tax. It's pretty shocking to a lot of people who are new to the US and not familiar with US tax laws. So that's for US citizens and non-citizen residents. The shocking thing is that for non-resident aliens, that $11.7 million exemption is actually only $60,000. So you can have $60,000 of assets that you can leave behind tax-free. Anything over that is going to be subject to that estate tax, a 40% estate tax. So, it's pretty easy to hit a $60,000 estate threshold. You buy one house, that you live in, or you have a company that's worth anything over $60,000, and all of a sudden your estate is subject to really high estate taxation. So there are naturally nuances to this that I won't get into here, but generally there are planning strategies that non-resident aliens can utilize, including life insurance, to offset those taxes or create pools of funds that could be used to pay estate taxes in the event that happens, so that they don't have to be forced into a situation where they have to liquidate assets quickly just to come up with tax money.
So it sounds like if you've got a significant amount of investment, you don't want to mess around and try to just do some like legal Zoom type of a thing where you're making some entity. I mean, you got to consider your taxes, your entity, and like we were saying, the immigration side as well, and also your estate planning. So like you really need a team of experts
Absolutely.
to help support you.
Absolutely. That's right on, Ruby. We the way that we work with our clients is that kind of with the understanding that we're a very small firm. You can go to national, multinational law firm that has everybody in house, but you're going to be paying corporate rates. And so what we do here is we basically will assemble the team. We'll get with the immigration lawyer. We'll get with an international tax advisor. Anyone else that might be needed for that particular client or business, and then we will go through an in-depth planning session where we talk about, okay, we're looking at each of these different things together and then figuring out how do we reconcile all those and put them all together harmoniously in one, setup. So it absolutely goes so far beyond just setting up a company. And, setting up a company does have its own value all to itself, but, asset protection and estate planning, it's really more of an ongoing plan and almost a lifestyle, if you will. So, jumping right into the next set of choice of entity considerations, we're talking to our clients about liability, risk, and management. And so this really has to do a lot with the nature of the business, the risks that are unique to that company. But this is where we're going to start deciding on management structures. So are these companies going to be, owner operated, where the owners directly run the business? Is there going to be a group of, managers that run the business on behalf of the owners? Or is this something a little bit more unique, maybe something board operated, like you would think of a public corporation where you've got a board that looks out for shareholder interests? And then one kind of less talked about type of entity or entity topic is single purpose entities, SPEs. These are critical when you are acquiring commercial real estate or new ventures that are funded by investor money or commercial loans. And the reason for that is because those lenders, those investors, they don't necessarily want the assets of your business to be subject to historical risk, right? If you've been operating a company for a long time, maybe something bad happened a year ago that hasn't come to fruition yet, you're going to be sued 2 years from now, but you don't know about it. And so a lot of times what they'll require is for you to set up just a brand new company to hold that asset and to operate that business, just so that no ghosts of the past come back and haunt you. So they want their assets to be protected. And so SPEs can come into these conversations. That's where we kind of go into then, okay, so now we've decided what immigration process we're undertaking, what type of business we're doing, how we're going to hold it. So the next question becomes, where's the money going to come from? What capital needs do the investors have or the owners have? So is this something that we're self-funding? And if we're self-funding, are we bringing cash from abroad? Are we trying to, bring cash into the United States? Are you going to be raising money from investors? Who are those investors? Or are you just looking for debt? Are you going to go to a bank or some private lenders and borrow money to raise the business? So we're helping clients evaluate those things. And then we're also helping execute the contracts and transactions that relate to those. So just briefly, and of course, I could do probably a 6-hour presentation on choice of entity, but I just want to talk briefly about the three, umbrellas of entity options. So you basically have partnerships, various types of partnerships. You've got corporations, and that covers C corps and S corporations, and then you've got LLCs. Partnerships are what you might consider a traditional, group of people that work together to achieve a business purpose. Corporations are kind of rigid historical structures that have shareholders, they've got board of directors, and you own stock in a corporation. But it is what it is. You can't really mess around with what a corporation looks like too often. LLCs, limited liability companies, this is the, choice of entity probably 95% of the time that a business is getting started. LLCs are hybrid entities. They borrow the best parts of partnerships in terms of structuring and flexibility, but then they also take from corporations the liability protections and all these other things. So, and also LLCs can opt to be taxed as a corporation. So you can have an LLC that's taxed like a partnership or taxed like a C corporation or an S corporation. So when you look at what LLCs can do in terms of flexibility and structuring, there's really not a lot of reason to utilize any other type of entity. But that's kind of the rundown right there. So one common idea that really helps to be illustrated visually is how does an entity actually shelter assets? How does an entity actually protect the owners from liabilities that flow out of assets or from businesses? And so here we have a slide that just shows, this is what direct ownership looks like. This is what happens if you own an asset or income producing asset or a business directly with no entity planning in place, no liability shelters, basically. So here you have the business owner owning, in this case, it's illustrated as two pieces of income real estate, but these could be anything. They can be intellectual property, they can be a business, a restaurant, whatever you want it to be. So this is the situation where the owner owns these things in their own personal name. And so the question then becomes, okay, what happens if something bad happens inside this company? It defaults on a debt, a tenant gets injured on premises and the insurance doesn't cover it or doesn't cover it fully. Where is that injured or aggrieved party going to turn for recourse? They only have one place to go, the owner. And so here you have a direct path of liability from the asset to the owner. And then also, if a liability goes back to the owner and the owner can't satisfy it with cash, all of these assets that owner owns are going to be subject to that liability, to paying for it, basically. So here you have no protection. If you look at the bottom of the slide here, our goal when we're looking at structuring is to create 3 levels of separation. And these levels of separation, they're not always appropriate for all contexts, but at least 1 and 2 are always appropriate. And then 3 is for more kind of advanced structures or larger businesses that are a little bit more well established. So the first level of separation, this is the most common thing that people know and think about. This is where you separate your assets from yourself. And so the illustration here, same illustration, same person, 2 pieces of real estate or 2 business assets. However, in between them now, they've created this business entity. And this can be an LLC, corporation, limited partnership, whatever that might be. But here, you've got the situation now where the aggrieved party or injured party is looking for recourse. They have to go to the owner, just like in the previous slide, except in this case, the owner is a business entity. And so what that does is it cuts off the individual owner's liability by having liability kind of be trapped inside this entity. Now, of course, there are always exceptions to every rule, and it would become a little bit convoluted to go into all of them. There are situations where the corporate veil can be pierced, but the general thing to know is that if the entity is treated with the right level of formality, if it's being treated as a separate entity, you're not commingling its assets with your own assets or with other businesses, then that entity is going to work like it's supposed to, and it's going to protect you from the liabilities that are associated with your business operations. What it doesn't do, though, is it doesn't protect these pieces of real estate, for example, from liabilities that accrue from the actual assets themselves. So in the same way that in the previous slide, a liability against that owner could be satisfied by all the real estate that that owner owns. In this case, the liability can be satisfied against all properties that that entity owns. And so while the owner is protected, the assets themselves are not really sheltered from each other's liability. And so that brings us to level 2. This is where you are now separating assets from each other. And so this is achieved simply. There are lots of ways to do it, but in the simplest form, you basically are setting up multiple LLCs to hold multiple properties. So now you've got the same 2 assets, same 2 pieces of real estate, but each one is held in its own LLC. So when one of these properties accrues a liability, it goes into that LLC, but it doesn't jump into another LLC. It doesn't go back to the owner, and it doesn't impact the other property that's held by the other company. So this, a lot of times, this is going to be sufficient for people, and they can stop right here. However, once you have a going business that is operational, that has employees, that's performing services, but also owns assets, this is where we get at the 3rd level of separation, separating assets from services. So here you've got the same model, same 2 pieces of real estate, same 2 LLCs, but what has now happened is that this owner has set up a management company. This is a business that provides services on behalf of the LLCs or the other businesses, and actually interacts with tenants, with customers, and does things in such a way that it's designed to absorb a lot of the risk of the operations of a business from the actual companies that own the assets of the business. And so, this structure can be a little bit more cumbersome because you've got, multiple entities, multiple tax returns, books and records, but it's a cost benefit analysis between the cost of running it and the level of protection that you're getting.
That's what I was thinking. You have to file taxes for all of these entities. I mean, I know
That
that's
is true.
not a small consideration for all the pros of doing it this way. I only have 2 entities, and I feel like I get overwhelmed. But
Yeah, no, and it's definitely true. And I'm a practical person. I really recommend simplicity over anything. So a lot of times, like I said, level 1 and level 2 separation are going to be sufficient. When you're talking about the types of assets are also going to dictate what's justifiable. So if
right.
you're talking about, say, single family real estate investment, it's okay to start pooling properties into LLCs. Of course, there's a threshold. You never want to put 50 rental houses into one LLC, but 3, 4, 5, you can offset risk with good insurance. But when you're talking about commercial real estate, that's where SPE requirements come into play. There really is no option when you're talking about getting money through commercial lenders or investors to pool properties in a commercial context. So in that case, it justifies it. And then for operating businesses, the criteria for us is if the business itself is a separate company, okay, a full company with employees and customers and operations. In that case, it's going to justify splitting it off into its own thing. Otherwise, we will usually treat separate business ventures or kind of business divisions as just that, divisions of one existing company. So, that takes us to the next step of the process, which is the formation process. So I'll go pretty quickly over this. The formation process is, these steps. Basically, step 1 and 2 are kind of interchangeable here. State filings. We usually don't like to file the company with the state until we have a solid partnership contract negotiated, especially when we have multiple owners and investors. But sometimes timing and speed are necessary. So we'll go ahead and form the company, wait for the state to process that. It takes about 3 to 4 business days. And then in the meantime, we're putting together a partnership contract and, basically negotiating that, trying to get it done. But that is a longer lead time item, negotiating a partnership contract. And so we'll tend to want to do that up front unless we have some other reason to rush through it. Once the company's formed, the contracts are in place, the owner's agreements are locked down, then we need to go ahead and obtain an EIN number. This is an employment or
And
employer identification number.
do you mind if I ask a quick question? So for
Sure.
filing with the state, that doesn't take very long, because you can file it online, right?
Absolutely. Yes, we
Right.
do
Okay.
everything electronically. The filing with the state, takes us 10 minutes or less to actually complete. And the state then takes about 3 to 4 business days to process that. And then they'll issue a certificate of formation. Once you have that certificate of formation, that company is legally in existence. and subject to the terms of the existing partnership contract. So now you have this kind of empty shell company. We need to get it set up so it can go open a bank account, file taxes, hire employees, and that's all done through the EIN number. So this is an actual number that the IRS will issue, and it's done through a very simple application that we do for our clients. Once we have the EIN number, then the last step of the formation process is the funding of the entity. So funding just refers to transferring any assets into the business. And so most often funding involves just putting cash into the company's bank account. That's the most simple type of funding, the basic type of funding. However, there are other types of funding. You can transfer real estate, you can transfer business assets, you can transfer intellectual property, securities, you name it, you can put it into a company that is going to operate those assets. So we can help our clients with the planning of those things, but also the execution of the funding process. And then, two topics that come up that are not as common, especially in the early phases of the company, but that will become relevant almost immediately after the formation, is the establishment of credit for your business. There's a lot of misconceptions about how to build credit for a company. What I can tell you here in a short presentation is that there's no substitute for a long, successful operating history. That is going to be the best credit that your company can have. But if you need more formal credit channels, there are credit rating agencies that you can sign up with for businesses, and you report loans and payment schedules and things like that. And eventually, over time, your company will have an established credit file. But it does take a long time. And ultimately, this is a question that we get often is, when you're talking about small businesses, privately held companies, lenders are not really looking at the business itself to qualify. They're looking at the owners. So they're always doing personal underwriting, personal credit and income underwriting. And so, there's a little bit of a balancing act that goes into that.
I wanted to ask if this is where we got on the idea of even doing this webinar, was because I was talking about how EINs seem to be taking a really long time, and that's putting a wrench in the immigration processing. So what do you think is taking about right now for a person who doesn't have a social to get an EIN in Texas?
All right. Well, you're looking into the future, Ruby. So I'll jump right into that.
Okay.
And then if we have a minute, I can talk about.
Okay. No, yeah, we're fine. If you have time, we have time. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, so let me just go back to the formation really quickly, and then I'll get into that. But so the formation process, the last consideration after building credit is whether or not the company is going to be raising money through investors. Okay. So when we're talking about investors, we're talking about non-voting, non-participating, what people consider silent partners or passive investors. These are people that have no control over the company, that are basically just in good faith relying on the managers or operators to be honest, to be successful, to distribute money out to them, to pay them back their investments. So since those people have no control, the law seeks to protect them differently than if they were partners that have a vote over the business of the company. And so I just want to illustrate one very common entity structure that's used for private equity fundraising in real estate deals and other private placements or limited offerings. And that is in comparison to like public offerings, like when a company sells its shares on the public stock exchanges. That's not what this is. This is for private placements where for a limited group of a certain type of investors, usually high net worth investors. So this is where limited partnerships are often utilized. Limited partnership is just a type of partnership that basically has two different sides, two different types of owners. So you've got on one side, you've got the general partner. The general partner has full control over the partnership. And as a result of that full control, has full liability for the company's debts. So as a result, the general partner is not often a person. They're usually a shell company that has no assets, that's run by people. So if there is a liability that accrues, it goes into a shell LLC or something, as opposed to going directly against individual operators. And so this, as a result of that, the general partner will usually own a very small nominal share of that company. Here, the illustration shows 0.1%. That's just a safe number that we use. But on the other side of a limited partnership, you've got the limited partners. These are the investors. These are the people that have no control over the business. And as a result of that lack of control, there's this nice liability shield that protects them from any liabilities or debts of the company. And so investors really like the limited partnership model because they know that they don't have to do anything, that they're not going to be sued. And in some cases that the taxation that's going to come out of that is going to be passive taxation. So they're going to be taxed at an actually lower income tax rate than if they were operating a business themselves. All right. So here we are to the promised topics, Ruby. So these are some common pitfalls. And of course, you know, every aspect that I've talked about has pitfalls, right? Raising money from investors, going to the bank, borrowing money, just even operating a business comes with risk. What I'm going to talk about here right now are the risks that are unique to immigrant investor style business setups. And no surprise, they're usually timing related pitfalls because one common thread of almost all transactions that I do ever is that everyone's in a rush. And so I would love to go slow and take my time on everything. That's not often the possibility. And so two things that are shockers. So the big one, Ruby, is the one that you talked about, which is the EIN. The EIN can actually take forever right now. So if you have a social security number, once the company's formed, we have that certificate of formation in hand. We have our clients fill out what's called an SS4 form. I take that form, we go online to the IRS website. I can get your EIN number in literally minutes. We time out everything we do in our processes. So it currently takes about 4 minutes to apply for an EIN number online and get that and submit it to our client. They can go open a bank account same day. Without a social security number, you don't get to use the online system. So the EIN application has to be mailed, which is just out of the question when you're dealing with the IRS, or faxed. Fax is the next best option, so we take that. This is a recent one that we did. These are actual timelines. So in this situation, we formed the company, we applied for the EIN on January 18th of this year. Client starts getting a little bit impatient mid-February, starts nudging us a little bit, and we say, look, we're still within the normal timeframes for these. We called the IRS on March 3rd. We're on hold for 2 hours. We were told 45 business days from the application. So that would have been March 23rd. March 23rd comes and goes. Finally, April 1st, we received the EIN by fax. So that was actually 73 calendar days or 48 business days that it took. So something that usually takes minutes to do online took 48 business days. The issue with this, 48 business days is not, you know, tremendous long time, but if you're waiting for investor money, if investors are waiting for the company to fund, the bank account to be opened, if you're waiting for loan transactions to close, if you're buying a piece of real estate and hoping to close on it within a couple of weeks, it's probably not going to happen without an EIN number. And so the practical tip that I can give naturally is start the formation process early. The two longest lead time items are going to be the planning session itself, including all the partnership contract provisions, the immigration, the tax, and then strangely enough, applying for the EIN. That's going to be your, if not your longest lead time item.
So just a couple things, like you don't have to be in the US to register a business with the Secretary of State, right?
That is correct. You actually don't need any type of status to own and invest in a business here in the US.
And you don't have to be physically in the US.
You definitely do not have to be physically present. Right. Everything that we do on behalf of our clients. We do it all electronically, including signings, which are all done through DocuSign or some other similar electronic signing system. So they don't necessarily need to be physically present for any purpose, except for if they're going, and this is the second point here on my pitfalls, if they're going to open a bank account, a lot of banks will require in-person or wet signatures on signature cards to open that account. So if you don't know somebody at a bank and you say, I want to go open a bank account, they're going to require you to come into the branch and sign a piece of paper that has your signature on it. So if you have never been to the US, if you have no way of coming to the US or no desire to come to the US, this can present a pretty significant problem. The practical tip here is that having a personal banking relationship is going to be critical, even if that relationship is not your own. And so what I mean by that is that you personally as a client don't have to know any bankers here in the US, but it really helps if I know a banker or Ruby knows a banker who we can make a warm introduction and say, hey, I vouch for this client. They're a real person. This is a real business with a real purpose, and they need to open a bank account. A lot of times the banks are going to go out of their way in those situations to facilitate that by requiring by basically allowing you to mail in signature cards or accepting electronic signature cards until you actually make it to the US and bring physical ones with you. So that kind of backdoor angle always works, and it's a pretty good benefit. Now, we don't really pitch that as a service. We're not kind of selling that to our clients, but it's just a benefit of working with somebody that is here on the ground and has professional relationships.
Right. And I mean, I think the reason I was starting that conversation of what do you need to be here in the US is because, what I normally see is an investor comes in on a tourist visa, which might be given anywhere. They might have an ESTA, which gives them 3 months, or it might be a tourist visa, which might be 6 months, but they're not staying here for 6 months. They might just be here for a vacation, an intended investment, search scope, and they've got their job, their business, their life in the home country, so they can't stay very long. So I think what I see is that normally people will come once to scope things out. And you're right, there's a lot of planning involved. And especially when you're doing considering an international move. And so then you think about the entity, you think about the name, you're also thinking marketing in the back, like what name, the social media handles, all those little things. And then you do the entity with the Secretary of State, which it's not that complicated once you get all that pre-planning. And then the EIN, though, if you don't have a social, and I've seen this with my clients as well, you should definitely plan for at least maybe a month or two that it could take. And you can't really do much without that EIN because you can't make the bank account and start. And for almost everything that I'm talking about in immigration, you have to prove your investment. You need to show what you've done. You need to document it. And so if you're running your expenditures through some other bank account, maybe you can document it, but you really want to be funneling it through your business entity. And so you not being able to have a bank account until you have the EIN, you just have to keep these timelines in consideration. And this is what we have here at the end of May 2021, but we're hoping that they could speed up. But I think the IRS has just been it wasn't really as digitalized as a lot of the other government agencies, and it's just took COVID hit it a little bit harder. But and then I saw that as well with when I did the Goldman Sachs 10,000 businesses program, and they said have a relationship with a banker because you never know when you're going to need them. And it was so true. Like when COVID happened and PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, I was able to make a bank account without having to go down to the branch because of a warm introduction from another business owner. And so that's really helpful, especially if what happens is, which I think is what I'm seeing with my potential clients, is that they come in, they scope stuff out, and then they get stuck with the EIN part, and they have to leave to go back to their obligations, or their visa's about to expire.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, but they're so close to finishing this with the bank account. And then because once you get the bank account, then you want to get a credit card, you want to get to start buying stuff, start moving stuff around, transfer the funds. And so these are just considerations why we wanted to do this webinar, to be able to think about the big picture. There is a lot more planning needed. There's timelines that are in fact impacted, and it's also about relationships and having a team that can help support you. Because Saeed and I have both run businesses in the United States. I've lived in other countries. I can't, it's definitely, we're here to help you make this easier for you as a foreign investor in the United States. But it is a lot of work, even if this is your home country and your native language, to go through these things. But we have that experience and can bring that experience to the planning to make this a lot smoother.
That is right.
Well, we covered a lot of territory.
Sure did in a short time. Yeah. Well, that's us. That's our firm. And if you have any questions for me, you can visit our website, doitforthem.com. And happy to have participated, Ruby. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed everything that you told us today and shared with us. I mean, it was really great information. And, we here at Powers Law Group, we're a full service immigration law firm. So we have everything from naturalization, citizenship, to asylum, to immigration court, which is opening up in Houston in July, to employment investment opportunities and everything in between. So if you ever want to contact us, you can find us at rubypowerslaw.com. And we do webinars every Friday at 11, just to help give more information to help empower immigration solutions. And you could also reach us at 713-589-2085. And Saeed, how can they find you and your firm and everything you guys have?
Yeah, so all of our contact information is on our website, doitforthem.com. Yeah, we're a technology heavy firm, so email and Zoom and those types of things are really how we prefer to do business. But all contact information is there. We hold in-person meetings by appointment only. But yeah, we look forward to the opportunity to continue working with you and your clients. And if you have any questions or want to use us as a resource, please feel free to reach out anytime.
All right. Well, thank you so much for watching. And we will, this is on YouTube and it will be there if you need to rewatch or share with someone else. So have a great holiday weekend and stay safe. Thanks again.
Thank you.